Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I wanted to show you just a few little tips on sewing patches and ruffles and things like that when it comes to making your aprons or even your skirts. So I want to show you real quick. The skirt that I'm wearing is an old tattered ratty black skirt. And what I've been doing to kind of add a little cute factor to it, this is just my around the house work skirt, one of them. And I've been sewing on various patches all around the skirt. And you can see I just kind of leave the edges ragged. I don't, like again, it's just an around the house skirt. And so I don't care about how neat the patches look. And I tend to like the ragged look anyway when it comes to patches. And so I've been doing this to two of my two black skirts that I have mostly for just working in the garden, working around the house and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have to worry about it, but it's still cute enough that I can go out in public if I have to run out real quick, like mail a package at the post office. And so it was one of the reasons why it was important for me to patch up the holes, and also so they didn't get worse. But yeah, I've been wearing holes in my skirts. But also I have an apron order that just came in, and I figured now would be a good time to go over some of this stuff. I did have one of my followers who wanted a little bit more detail, a little better view on how I do the ruffles. Now, I don't have a special ruffle device for my machine, and I don't care to have one. It's just not important to me, because when I first got into doing this was when I was making lots and lots of costumes, because we did big dance shows every year, and I might have as many as 50 to 75 costumes to make in a year. And I couldn't afford to run out and buy special equipment for my machine. It was just doing stuff by hand, and I just kind of came up with my own little method. So some people have other ways, like using, putting in maybe a basting stitch and then pulling the string, and then it will make a nice even ruffle all the way around. I could do that, and I knew about that, but for some reason it was just, to me, I just like doing it by hand. I don't know why. I just like being able to have that control, and I can stretch out the ruffles for as wide as I want them and make it as roughly as I want, depending on how close I put them together. And like I say, it just gives me a little bit more control. Now, before I get started, I wanted to show you real quick this little teapot that Sherry from Two Family Homestead sent me. She sent me this along with that iron I was showing in that other video. If you're interested in learning a little bit about some antique irons, you can go ahead and check that video out right here. But I meant to show this off and say, thank you, Sherry, what a cute thing. So I figured, I don't know that I'll ever use it as an actual teapot. By the way, this little thing comes off, little sewing machine. But I thought it would make a cute addition to my sewing corner. So that's where it is. All right, so now I'm going to zoom in closer on my work here so you can see some of the different things I have going on a little bit better. All right, so these are the colors that she picked out, and frankly, I'm really liking these. Green and dark red are my favorite colors, and I'm kind of thinking about making myself an apron like this. So what I have here is the top of the apron, and what I like to do, since I don't do double fabric on my aprons, you can, and I've done that with a couple. I prefer to keep my aprons a little more lightweight, but that's what makes the patches kind of fun, and a fun way to add a little extra thickness where you might need it. I also tend to wear holes in my aprons above the pocket, like right in here, and so sometimes I'll if I start wearing holes, I'll just sew some more patches on there, and it still looks cute. So anyway, then at the top of the apron, I like to put another piece of fabric to add more stiffness to the top where the ties are going to sew on, and also just to add a little more interest in color and contrast. And so what I have here is just one long rectangle of fabric that I folded over and then folded over at the hems, as you can see here. And so all I'm going to do, and I want to do this first before I put on my ties or anything else, is I'm going to zigzag stitch this down, and I do kind of a medium tightness on the stitch when I'm doing this. And let's see, let's set it at a wider stitch too. Okay, and then And by the way, if you haven't seen I do have a video on making an apron, the apron as a whole, from start to finish, cutting it out and how I get my shape and how I get the size I want based off another apron. I don't use, it's the only thing I use is a pattern. I came up with the pattern on my own, and then from that, I just use my other aprons as patterns. And then what I'll do later is when I'm ready to put the ties on, I will stitch across the top of this as I'm putting the ties on and as I'm hemming the edges all the way around. So I'm kind of, you know, killing two birds with one stone when I do it that way. Now, when it comes to the patches, you want to make sure before you do anything else, it's not as important on the body part of the apron, but it is important when it comes to the pocket, that if you're going to put patches or anything of interest, or in the same thing here, how I've got this top to make a stiffer top on the pocket, I've got it doubled over. And of course, in this is one case I do like to pin things. Same thing at the placement of the patches. And you want to make sure on this one that you stitch both of these down before you actually sew your pocket onto your apron. And same thing with your patches. You're best off to put these on first. It's going to be much more difficult to get the patches on the pocket if you wait until after you have it stitched onto your apron. So let's go ahead and move on to the pocket. I can show those other things later. So again, let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to sew the top part on. And so, like I said, in this case, I'm going to sew both parts. And you really want to have the stitch in both places. It gives it a more finished look, and it keeps this thing from bunching up when it's washed or whatever. Alright, so now I have the stitches at the top and the bottom of the border, the top border of the pocket. And I prefer zigzag. I use zigzag most of the time when I'm sewing. I use it more than any other stitch. Well, I don't really use any other stitch but the straight stitch, and it obviously has its places. But that's why this sewing machine is just fine for me. This is a Genome treadle machine. Let me come back up if you're new to my channel. And this is an old table that I got from my mother-in-law, but the machine was new when I bought it about 5 years ago, something like that. I keep forgetting what year it was I bought it. But I've been using it. This is a real workhorse. I've been using it for so many things all these years, and even was still teaching dance at the time and was even sewing costumes on this thing. Sequins and all that kind of stuff. I used to break needles all the time going through my denim quilts and sequins and all the different heavy things that I made, but since I had this, I don't break needles anymore. It's great. I don't know what the difference is, but it's just been a wonderful machine. So now on to the patches. Now I'm going to sew these with the rough edges just out. I asked the lady before I decided to do it this way to make sure she would like this, because it was totally up to the customer. If she wanted a nice clean edge, then I would have folded each edge over so that there would be a clean edge with no raggedness, because once you wash this, as you would have seen on my skirt, you're going to have some ragged edges. In fact, here's that very fabric right there. And you can see it's got a little bit of raggedness. It's been washed a couple times. One thing you can do if you want is you can use a pinking shears, you know, the zigzag blade, and that will help prevent that, where you wouldn't have to hem it either, but you won't get as much fray. But what I found is that most of the time it just frays the most in the first couple of washes, and then it's fine. So what I do is I usually go with a little bit tighter stitch just to be on the safe side, and then when I've got a layout like this, I tend to start from here and then go around, just go all the way around. I'll back stitch and then come back. Same thing here, and around and around. Or you can just keep cutting your threads and then go around each individual one. It's totally up to you how you want to do it. So I'm just going to show you up to this point, and then I'm going to speed it up after this. So I'm going to do a backwards just to get that corner down, and then I'll come back. Okay, and then from this point, I'm going to speed the rest of it up. All right, now that I have the pocket all done, what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to do this on camera because you can always watch my other video because I believe I show that in there, is I'm going to center the pocket where I want it, and you know, then I'll fold over the edges, and so I have a nice hem, because on the pocket I do definitely want it folded over and a nice hem. It's just the patches I like to have the rough edges. But I want the pocket to be good and stable. So when I sew this on here, I'm gonna double, triple stitch this at each corner, especially at the top, but even at the bottom, because these are gonna be the places that are gonna take, especially the top, that are gonna take the most wear and tear as you're putting stuff in your pocket. Now, when I was first making these aprons, I was leaving most of the pocket really big for lots of space, and then just putting on the right-hand side, for those who are right-handed, or left-hand side for those who are left-handed, just a little small pocket for like a cell phone or a pocket knife. But what I found is that with such a big pocket, it tends to gap too much. So I've gone back to just doing a divider right down the center of the pocket. So I'm going to sew a stitch. After I get this on here and centered, I'm going to sew a stitch right up the center, and again double tripling the stitches up here so it holds, and I find that works really good for me. If my phone or my pocket knife kind of slops around in a big pocket, it's actually not that big a deal, and it's easier to get to that way. So I'm finding I like that better. I'm going to go ahead and stitch these on, and then I will get to the ruffle and how I do that. All right, now before I move on to the ruffle, one more thing I wanted to say, and that is, and I keep forgetting, is that when it comes to folding over your edges for hemming down, what I like to do is use a spray water bottle, and I spray it and then fold it and then just press it with my hands. Now, you may find it easier to use an iron, and that's fine, that you know, just iron it down, but it is important that you have your edges pressed down. It's going to make it a lot easier for when you're sewing your hems or anything like that. Now, I don't do that when I'm doing the outside hem and going around, but when I'm doing the pocket or these pieces like this, these trim pieces, I always wet it down just lightly, enough where I can press it and it's going to stay with a nice crease in it. Okay, so I want the top, the front part of the apron facing me. And then here's my ruffle. Now I cut mine typically 8 to 9 inches wide. How long you want your ruffle is going to be up to you. 6 to 7 inches if you like a shorter ruffle. I tend to like a nice big ruffle. It covers more that way, and it's just pretty in my opinion. So I've already got 2 pieces hooked together, stitched together. And how to determine how long your ruffle, how much fabric you need for your ruffle is typically you're going to want it to be twice as long as the area you're going to sew it on. So one of these pieces, you can see where it's stitched together here, one of these is actually just the right length to go around this whole curvature of this apron. So putting 2 together gives me plenty for bunching up. Now you can make it even more roughly if you want by putting a 3rd piece on, but I think that would be a little bit too much. You can even do 1.5 times if you want your ruffle very spread out. So now I'm going to go ahead and start, and since I've got this white piece here, I'm going to leave that on because it's already edged, but it will be folded over. I'm going to go ahead and let it overlap that way just a little bit more. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and use a zigzag stitch. Now, I'm going to set it on not so wide of a stitch, but I'm also going to keep it a tight stitch, so that way I don't have to go back over this rough edge again. Now, for your ruffle and the edge of your apron, or whatever it is you're sewing onto, if you're using a cotton, all cotton like I'm doing here, and you know it's gonna fray some, you may want to use pinking shears. However, just like with the patches, what I find is once you've washed it once or twice, it doesn't keep fraying, especially if you use a good zigzag stitch. And it doesn't even have to be a super tight one either. So you can see how I have this folded right here. You can fold it, just fold it this way, and then stitch, lock down the first, when you first start, and then on the next one, you can fold it the other way, and then how evenly apart or how far apart you put it is going to be up to you. I find about this far apart tends to be good, and if I end up with a little bit extra at the end, that's okay. See, I'm just kind of guessing. Or if I come up short, then what I do is I just sew another piece on. But typically I find that twice, having the ruffle fabric twice as long as the piece I'm sewing onto, and then doing my folds about this close together works really good. And I usually come out pretty close. So I just fold it one way and then I fold it the other way. And with the treadle machine, it does take a little bit longer because you have to reach up here and put a spin on your wheel every time you stop. But you just get the hang of it. You get used to it, and I don't mind it. It was, especially when you got to do a reverse stitch, that's can get a little bit tricky. But it's just another one of those things. You just kind of learn the muscle memory, just like working the pedal. Now I folded that the same way as the last one, but that's really not a big deal. Another way you can do your folds, fold it this way, then you push it over that way so it has two folds in the same spot. That one, to me, I'll do that from time to time, but that could be a quicker way for you. So notice how I folded it this way. I've got it pinched, and then I just bring the fabric. You obviously got to hold the bottom down piece of fabric down so it doesn't follow you, and then I drag it back and then fold it again that way, and now I have two folds in one spot. And if you may want to check it and see if you like the look of that better. I usually kind of actually just switch it up. Sometimes I do the double fold, sometimes I do the fold forward, sometimes I do the fold back. It's just each thing I do is going to be very unique. I don't keep it the same every time. I'm going to go ahead and fold that way. Now I'll fold towards me. Okay, so now I'm about at the halfway point. I'm at the halfway point on the ruffle, and it looks like I'm at the halfway point on the apron as well, so I've called this pretty good. I usually try to make sure right where the seam is, I do a fold there, because I think that helps hide the seam a little bit better. So even if it ends up really close to another fold, I don't worry about it. And for some reason, I always like to double stitch, like reverse and then go forward again, wherever I have a seam. It's just a little safety measure I take, just to add a little more sturdiness to it. So I did end up bunching just a little bit too much in some place because I came up a tiny bit short, but that's okay. I had plenty of fabric I was able to add on. Now, one more thing I wanted to say about when I'm cutting out the pieces for the ruffle or for the patches, what I prefer to do instead of actually cutting is to rip it. And that's also going to help with the fray problem. It's just going to make it come out straighter and look a little bit nicer. So I get an idea the size I want my patch to be, and then as far as width. So if it's going to be that big, and then if I want it square, you know, I rip my fabric to that size. Then I take the end and I fold it over like that. That's going to give me a square. Or you can measure it out, or you can use a pattern. And then I just put a little snip, and then I rip it, and now I have my patch. So that, to me, that's just the best way to do it. And then any really long pieces you can just snip off, no big deal. One more thing I'll show is how I do my ties. Is I cut long, I make them 4 to 5 inches wide pieces of fabric, and then rip it down. And I find having it just a little bit, these are kind of long actually, but having it about 1 yard long is going to be just about the right size for a tie. However, something I want to try different is the ties around the waist. I'm wanting to make a little bit longer, so if people want to bring them around and tie them in front and put a bow like on the side, I thought that would be kind of a cute idea. So anyway, all I do is then I'm going to fold it in half, right sides together. And then this is where I'm going to use a straight stitch. And I'm going to stitch that all the way down, making sure I lock down that first stitch. And then I'm just going to do a straight stitch all the way down to the end, and then lock down the end. By the way, you're going to want to make sure this is good and straight. That's another reason why ripping these, you're going to get a straighter edge. Straight. When you go to stitch your sides together, it's going to end up being, it's going to really be off, and you'll know when you get to the end. So then, this is another reason why you want to lock the stitch down, because when you go to turn it, that's where you're going to have the issue. Now, if this is wide enough like this is, and you've got small enough fingers, you can just pull it through this way. But that can take a while. There's several different ways you can do it. Patrick, the easiest, fastest way is I have a whole bunch of these. I bought a big set of them last time so I could have all different sizes, and then there's the curved ones too. Is I just take the forceps and I reach in there and I pinch some fabric in there and just pull. And then you just keep doing that. Obviously you're going to get to a point where you can't really do it that way, so you got to be careful you don't grab the outside edges. And then I just keep doing that until I have it pulled all the way through. Typically this is, like I said, I do this when I'm hemming the apron in the first place. So I'm going to turn the apron this way, and then I fold my tie so that the seam is right there in the center back, and now I'm going to fold this over twice so I can keep my outside edges really nice. And I like to overlap it quite a ways so that when I'm hemming this now, I'm going to be sewing this right across there like that. So I'm getting two things done at the same time, and I want a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to set it at the widest setting, and I'm going to keep it a little bit on the tighter side, not too loose. And I'm going to double it here at each point because this is the tie. This is going to be taking a lot of stress. And I'll do the same thing here and double it here. Double, triple, quadruple. And then I just go along the top. That's going to give my finishing stitch on the top. And then I'll do the same thing. I still have to finish sewing and turning all my my ties. So I'll do that, and I do the same thing here. I do the same thing at each tie at the corner. You can see the corners I have cut out here. This is where the waist tie goes. And again, if you want a little more detail on this, you can go see my other video on how I cut it and put it together. But anyway, one thing I forgot to mention because I got ahead of myself there is that before you sew your ties onto your apron or onto whatever it is you want to sew them onto, and you fold your edges in, make sure that you stitch it down first. I can't believe I totally forgot that. Well, I can believe it. I get ahead of myself. And again, I like to zigzag the edges. Now, as long as you at least zigzag one end, the end that you want to sew onto your apron or whatever it is you're sewing it onto, as long as you do that, at least those ones first. You can leave the other edges raw until you finish your apron, because you may decide you want to cut these shorter. So you may not want to bother, if you're making it for yourself, sewing these both ends down until after you get the apron all put together, because then you might have just wasted a stitch. But I'm going to go ahead, since I know I'm going to leave these this length, I'm going to go ahead and stitch down each end and then sew it onto my apron. Grr. Anyway, for reals now, I'm going to go on and finish this apron and then show you what it looks like when it's all done. All right, well there's the finished product. I still got to wash it up and finish getting all the threads clipped off of it, but other than that, it is all done. So I wanted you to see what it looked like in its entirety. And if you're interested in more videos on sewing, I will have this in my sewing playlist that also has videos showing how to use a treadle machine, and you can find the links to my treadle machine in the description box. So remember to hit the show more if you want to see all the links and contact information in there. So thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.